Come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. Let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. What can I do with you, Ephraim? What can I do with you, Judah? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. Therefore I cut you in pieces with my prophets. I killed you with the words of my mouth. My judgments flashed like lightning upon you. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. Like Adam, they have broken the covenant. They were unfaithful to me there. Gilead is a city of wicked men, stained with footprints of blood. As marauders lie in ambush for a man, so do bands of priests. They murder on the road to Shechem, committing shameful crimes. I have seen a horrible thing in the house of Israel. There Ephraim is given to prostitution, and Israel is defiled. Hi there. Pastor Corey here over at First Congregational Church. That passage comes to us from Hosea chapter 6. The reason I'm looking at that this week is because I'm preaching on Matthew 12, verses 1 through 14, and there Jesus quotes verse 6 of Hosea 6. Matthew 12, verse 7 says this, "If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent." Now, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees there. The Pharisees were a group of Jews who, let's face it, they were strictly under the law. They believed that if they could follow the law to a T, that they would find favor with God. And so one of their issues was that, yes, they were obedient to God's commands, even beyond God's commands, and yet they struggled to have a relationship with God. And so they are very similar to this generation that Hosea, the prophet, was speaking to. Now, Hosea was a prophet roughly about 700 to 800 years before Christ. He was speaking to the northern kingdom of Israel for the most part. And God had brought judgment upon that nation. And the reason he did so was because they were no longer relying on him, but they were putting their trust in idols, foreign gods. They were putting their trust in the power of foreign nations to help them out in their time of need and desperation. There was big battles going on between Assyria and Egypt at the time, and Israel looked to these more powerful nations because they were kind of caught in the middle. And so Israel would make treaties with these nations instead of relying on God to protect them. And so what we see going on here is the judgment of God had come upon Israel. If you read chapter 5 of Hosea, you can read all about that. I recommend you doing that. But then what we see in Hosea 6 is that the people of Israel, they come up with this idea. What if we just turn back to God? Let's go back to him. Let's go back to the sacrifices. If we do that, God will rescue us. He will revive us. On the third day, he will restore us. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains. I mean, that sounds very good, doesn't it? Sounds like they have repented. And yet, what does God say to them? What can I do with you? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. Their love for God, it was not permanent. It was just there for the need that they had. They were in a time of distress. They were in the midst of these two powerful armies, and so what do? They said, well, let's go back to the sacrifices, and then God will take care of us. But they're only doing this because of the trouble that they were in. They were not doing this out of a pure love for God. And that's the reason that God says this. He says this in verse 6. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. What does he mean by that? Well, he looked at the way they lived their lives. They were not living a life honoring of him. What does he say? Gilead's the city of wicked men. Their footprints are stained with blood. And the priests are like marauders lying in ambush, committing shameful acts. Ephraim is given to prostitution. Israel is defiled. And so they may have claimed to have loved God by going back to these sacrifices, but they did not have a true love for God. I'm thinking about our own generation now. We have come into a time of crisis, have we not, with this pandemic? And we see a lot of people at this time turning to God. And that is a good thing if it is real. The question is, why are they turning to God? Is it for them just to get through the trial that God has them under? Or is it really to draw close to God? My question is, what will the life of those who have suddenly turned spiritual be like once the dust settles? Once we have gone back to normal? Will they still have that desire to draw close to God? Right now there's that need, and I get it. I feel it. My family feels it. But we need to turn to God for something more. That desire just for protection, that desire to get back to our prosperous lives, that can't be all there is when seeking God. That must turn into a love for Him. They must realize that their true need is to be in that right relationship with the Father Almighty. And that right relationship can only come through Jesus Christ, the one who died for our sins and then rose from the dead 3 days later. And so that's my question, my challenge for you this week. If you have turned to God recently because of this crisis, I want to ask you, why have you done so? Is it just to get out of the problems that you are in? Or is there something more to it? Are you drawn to Him for who He is because you love Him? That's what that must turn into. If you truly want to find salvation in Him, then it cannot just be, God, I'm in trouble, please help me. But it needs to be more than that. God, I see who you are. I see the love that you have for me, and in turn, that has turned into a love for you. So that's my challenge for you this week. Ask yourself, why are you drawn to God at this moment? Will it remain once the dust settles? Take those thoughts to heart. God bless.